welcome to Ignite Elim Church Online. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today. Please hit that subscribe button so you can see all of our upcoming content that we upload. In today's session, we're going to carry on with the Hunger Games campaign. We're looking at justice throughout the month of July. And in fact, we've got a guest speaker all the way from America who's going to be talking about racial justice at Urban Wave this year. So if you'd like to be part of our church, if you'd like to engage with our church, then please hit us up in the comments, like us on Facebook and all that sort of stuff. In tonight's session, we're going to talk about implicit bias. I really hope that you enjoy this talk and some of the discussion that we have throughout the evening. God bless you. Lovely. Okay. Yes, we are here tonight. We're going to carry on with our Hunger Games campaign. We're looking at justice. So if you have a notebook like Paul does, then great, good on you, well done you. If you don't have a notebook, then that's cool as well. Tonight we're going to be studying or looking at discussing a big area of justice that is again not so. I was tempted to go in on justice for the poor or something like that, which you guys know me. I talk about that sort of stuff all the time. But instead, I thought I would try and tackle a sort of meta-justice issue. So that is a step above the ground roots and up into sort of like the background behind why people suffer injustice, if that makes sense. Yeah? We're good for that? Yeah? Okay. So tonight we're going to be looking at the concept or the realism of implicit bias. Have you guys heard of this term before? Hello, Malcolm. Come and join us, good sir. Hello, mate. Welcome. There's a few tables and chairs around. I was just getting started. Feel free to sit wherever you like, my friend. It's good to see you again, Malcolm. It's been a little while. Bless you, mate. I'm so glad you're here. So yeah, we are studying, or we're gonna have a discussion about the idea or the concept or the realism of implicit bias. Would you guys like me to explain implicit bias, or would you like me to first of all ask you some questions? What's your understanding of it? You're ready to say something? Ah, there we go. That's literally, it's like you've read my notes. So working with the council and stuff like that, you've had to go on courses about unconscious bias. And I think I might have done some of these courses as well, where you learn about your own unconscious biases, right? So let's have a little show of hands, okay? So maybe you guys have not had the same sort of biases as what I've suffered. But for example, have any of you guys ever walked into a shop and had someone follow you around like you're going to rob something? You had that? Okay, interesting. You've had that as well. Yes. I fit the perfect profile. You fit the perfect profile. Okay, you had the youngest in the buggy, so they thought that you would be using the buggy as a means to conceal stolen goods, right? However, I'm talking about, like Paul said, just the way that I dress. So the fact that I was wearing a hoodie and a cap, unbeknownst to them, I was a pastor at the time, and our local shop just over here had someone follow me around in case I was stealing, just because of the way that I looked. But you can understand that though, can't you? You can. Oh, here we go. Go on, good sir. How can we understand that? Here you go. Here's a microphone.
What's going to happen is they're there to do a job, okay. And statistically they'll go, somebody who dresses like a gangster rapper is more likely to be pilfering than somebody who's in a shirt and tie with a suit on. So although I'm not defending it and saying it's right, these people are looking after their employers' interests and going, well, he is statistically more likely to be a thief than somebody else.
Okay, okay.
A piece of clothing that could very easily be used to obscure your identity on camera.
Yeah, okay, so I was wearing a piece of clothing that could very easily be used to obscure my identity on the cameras. So in terms of people who steal things, can just by show of hands, who thinks that chavvy types steal more from the economy than, say, bankers? Does anyone think? Oh, you think that's the truth? Okay. Oh, sorry. Was I just a little bit naughty then? Did I change the rules of engagement just then? Is that what I did? That was my unconscious bias, indeed. Paul mentioned earlier on that whilst we were chatting, because he's been here for hours, Paul mentioned earlier on that Darren, Paul believes that I sometimes engage in what some would call inverted snobbery. Has anyone ever heard of this? Yeah, so because I'm from the estate, that means anyone in the suit is out of order and they've been stealing from me and my family for years because of Maggie Thatcher, right? Yeah? Inverted snobbery, right? Taken to the extremes on my estate back home, that would mean anyone in the suit deserves to get robbed. Okay, so so that's a sort, usually the provident man. That guy definitely doesn't. No, don't say that on camera. Because they charge extortionate rates for interest, don't they? And take advantage of poor people on housing estates who don't have any money until payday, right? So, anyway. Okay, what other implicit biases have you... you were going to say something, go on.
Okay, I'm the type of person...
1 second, let me get this. Here you go.
Okay, I'm the type of person, every time I go for an airport, I'm always the one that gets stopped and gets searched. I've even been pulled off the plane, and I've never carried drugs, alcohol, taken anything through at all. But for some reason, I have that face. Interesting,
you see, because when I was a younger man, and I'll be honest with you, I think I'm just starting to get over it. For years, I would say that I wouldn't like spending time in the local constabulary. Is that what you call a pub? It is, isn't it? Because I have the sort of face that people like to slap. All right, Paul, you all right, mate? Yeah? And for whatever reason, whenever I went to a pub or club or something like that, I'd always get into a fight. Weird, isn't it? Because my wife would first of all say that bankers definitely steal more from the economy, by the way. My wife would also say that, Darren, maybe you brought on some of those slaps yourself by the way that you was acting in said pubs and clubs, which is probably true to some degree, but for some weird reason, right, I feel that I've just got the sort of face that people like to slap. You feel that you've got the sort of face that people like to stop thinking you're taking drugs or something, or you're taking drugs and stuff to another country. Yeah, drugs mule. Weird, isn't it? You always get searched. I've never been searched, actually. No, Malcolm's never been searched. Malcolm, what sort of unconscious biases might people have against those that are served in the armed forces? Not long. So in the armed forces then, it's almost like there are different tribes within the armed forces, and if you say you're from one, then people look down on you. I think my uncle was invited to apply for the armed forces police at one point, and he just said, no, I'm not even going to bother applying because apparently they're looked down upon more than anyone else in the armed forces. Is that right? And so there are these feelings that we have, right, that are somewhat prejudiced, yeah, because a bias is a prejudice. It's the same word, more or less. A bias is a prejudice against certain people because of the way they look or the job they do. Have you guys suffered this being ladies at all? Have you got any examples of that?
Walk in a church as a woman with kids and without anybody knowing anything, whether they don't even know whether you're divorced, whether you're widowed. For all they knew, I could have been widowed. But there was a definite prejudice against me being a woman by myself with children. Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of being a single mum, the funny thing is no one would have known that you were a single mum. You might have had a husband at home, you know what I mean? And yet they treat you differently because you arrived by yourself, right? Or at least they may act differently around you, right? Jean, you've once said that you find it really difficult to go to church as a single person when there are lots of couples and stuff like that, and that single people would get treated differently and stuff. Yeah? And so there are all these sort of unconscious biases, or I've written down here a covert prejudice. I know. Come on. Can you tell I've been studying today? And like there are all these different ways in which people treat each other differently or look at each other differently, based on the way they look, the way they smell, the way they sound, even to the point of people's names. So if for example, someone like there's 5 different people applying for a job, and one of them has a surname Edwards, and another one has Smith, and another one has James, and another one has Daniel, and then one of them has the name something like, I don't know, Alfonso. Then for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, we know the reason, there is an implicit bias. The one name that looks different automatically, sometimes unconsciously, gets treated differently. Maybe for the surname Smith, you might spend 5 minutes looking at their CV, but the person with a surname that is different, you might only spend 1 minute looking at. And that's called an implicit bias. It's essentially an injustice because you're treating someone differently based purely and simply on a surname that looks different. I guess that would be almost like a bias in favour of someone, right? Yeah? And we see that, don't we? In fact, one of the ways that people or companies and the government have been trying, and certainly the armed forces at the moment have been trying to undo some of this bias or prejudice that has happened over the last 50, 60, 70 years, or however long it's been, is to deliberately favour people who might have been seen or treated differently in the past. So, for example, more people are being taken on now who have disabilities. Deliberately being taken on because they have disabilities. There was a thing in the press recently, wasn't there, about how the armed forces are deliberately trying to take on people that have been left out or had a prejudice against them for years and years, to try and undo some of the stuff that has taken place in our nation. And so when we talk about this stuff, it's interesting because there's so much of it that we barely even see. We haven't even mentioned age bias. Malcolm, do you ever think that people like treat you differently because you're more mature? Because I remember, there are times where people say to me, will I be able to serve because I'm older? I think you might have even said that before, Gene. Sometimes in church life, young people get all of the opportunities because they're the future, right? Actually, that's one of the things that I've been writing about, because I as a 3-month-in young Christian, was invited to lead a couple of teams in our church that were probably 50 or 60% African descent. And they had been Christians a lot longer than me. And they were more professional than me. And they'd been doing that particular role in church for a lot longer than me. And yet I was asked to lead that thing. And just as I've been writing, I thought, wow, some of the stuff that's coming up in my research, one of the things that was mentioned was that sorry, 1 second. was that in Western culture, everything focuses and revolves around the future. We're always thinking, we need to plan for the future. We need to look to the future. We need to promote the future. We need to, it's all about the young people and doing the new thing and the fresh thing and all that sort of stuff. Whereas in Nigerian culture, actually, there's a lot more focus on tradition and what's been and how that affects our now, And so for my pastor at that time to shove me in as the new Christian, the future and all that sort of stuff was almost like a smack in the face to these folks who put a lot of emphasis and value on tradition and what has been, and the fact that they'd been serving in that position. I remember one day actually, a lady was quite angry because we were changing our process and our procedures, and she said, "I've been doing this for 20 years. Don't you think I know how to do that?" And unfortunately, me being quite ignorant, if you don't mind me being quite honest, I just thought that she had a personal problem. So, maybe, we'll get over it somehow. But actually, I was a young man who was very new to this thing called faith and very new to this community that was church, trying to tell someone who had been doing something for 20 years how to do their job. Not only that, but I was white and male and she was black and female, to someone who is serious and honourable and should be honoured, right? Unfortunately, I was a Christian for 3 months, and I was 23 years old, and so the resolution was simply she quit there and then. It is sad, isn't it? Yeah, she quit there and then, very angrily in front of 100, 120, 150 people, and even today, like I'm writing my paper, and it's a reflective paper, so I'm there going actually, we made a lot of mistakes, not just me, because obviously I was very immature, I didn't know anything. One of the saddest things, actually, is the realisation that the place where I learnt the term African time was in church. Yeah? I worked with people from African descent for years. I'd managed people from African descent. I'd never heard the term African time until I got to church. How sad is that? That there's racism that I learned when I went to church. Bad, isn't it? Yeah, and that remembering the old and remembering the years gone, you've been a Christian for 40 years, Malcolm? Something like that? Yeah, around about that, yeah. And so to throw all of that away for the sake of a young whippersnapper who's, barely even read their Bible, that is bad news for the church, isn't it, And yet we so easily do that, don't we, Paul, you were going to say, do you want this? Yeah.
I was involved with a church that split itself into youth, into young adults, into middle-aged, up to about 30, the young adults. And then you sort of had a gap because they said they weren't a demand for parents and children or whatever. And then you had the senior citizens, or 50 odd over, and you had life groups like that. And I was had a beard then, and the person thought I was over 55 and offered me all these wonderful things anyway, that's a long story. But the point is that you in the life groups and stuff, you actually missed the opportunity of having the young and the old, across the whole spectrum, coming together. So the old got the young and the young got the old, and they got the experience and the expertise. So they were throwing away the opportunity to generation after generation after generation. Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing that churches tend to think we concentrate on the youngsters that are coming through because they're the future. And forget, it is sort of implicit, isn't it, to look at one part and ignore another.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lovely. Yeah. Seems we get the idea, right? Yes, it's not a difficult concept to get. It's an unconscious thing. Here's some of the ways that we do this in church. Like we've already mentioned, sometimes we judge people on their appearance, on their name, or sometimes on the way they smell. Bless them. I know you all smell really good today, so that's not a slur. But the truth is that actually, certainly in our church and on our estate, I've come to find that we do get people who haven't been taught things like hygiene and stuff, and they get treated differently. They get treated differently because their teeth look different. And they get treated differently because of their educational status, right? I was saying to Paul earlier on, the term that they have in Scotland for us folks who come off the estate is NEDs. Do you know what a NED is? Non-educated delinquent. Yeah, I know. Where we are, down in Chatham in Kent, they use the Romany word chav, which is how we started off. We started off as we're Chav Church and we're proud of our heritage. We're proud of being working class and all that sort of stuff. And we want to try and attract people that are working class. Remember that, Malcolm, back in the day? So one thing that we do in church, we judge people based on the way they look or the way they sound. Yeah? Yeah. I'm constantly offering you a shave. All right. And then the other thing that we do is we don't offer people the same opportunities, right? One of the things I think we spoke about, when did we speak about this? Maybe on Sunday, we mentioned the whole thing of how for a lady to be able to get to the top of an organisation, they would need appropriate mentoring and stuff. But then there's no opportunities to be mentored because certainly in a Christian church, men don't mentor women, right? And so because men are all at the top, none of the women can make it to the top because no men will mentor them because they're not given the same opportunities. And we find the same in church life, right? So in church life, we find that sometimes actually because people are young, they don't get an opportunity. Sometimes because they're hairy, they don't get an opportunity. Sometimes because they're female, they don't get the same opportunities. And so certainly us guys as a church here, hopefully you've got the message that that we try to make all the opportunities available to everyone. There's just some standards by which we try to keep for people to take on some of those opportunities.
Yeah. So, on Sunday, you, Daz, were making tea and coffee up at Birchwood, yeah? How many churches, if you walk in, you might offer to help, would they only the women would be told, you can help with the teas and coffees? And so it's not just about what you're offered at the top, it's also about what you're offered at the bottom. And is somebody who has status in the church doing all the roles in the church, including the ones that are seen to be at the bottom, not just the one to the top?
Brilliant, that's perfect. Okay, because there was I said to a lady recently, I said, what are you going to do? Now, you guys have probably experienced this, right? What are you going to do? What's your ministry? What's your passion? What's your purpose here? And then she said to me, you just want me to do kids' church. I'm like, no, I don't. What makes you think that? Well, because everywhere she's always been told you're a woman, so you do kids' church, right? And that's just the way it is, isn't it, in church? And it's not on, is it? It's not okay. And so everyone should be treated the same. And so we need to be offering everyone the same opportunities at both ends of the scale, right? And actually, maybe some blokes should be told to go and do kids' church, right? Because if these kids had more blokes in their lives, then actually maybe society might change a little bit, right? True? Very true, they all say in a chorus. Okay, another area where church doesn't do this very well is the people that we call friends. Yeah? So a good example of this is, as a male, I can't really be a friend of all the females, right? Which is true to some degree. Like if I've got more female friends in church than I have male, then probably there's a bit of an issue going on there. But actually, the truth is that sometimes we keep certain people around us and we don't have other people around us. Maybe all of my friends today are all lefties and I don't have any right-wing friends. Obviously, that's not true of me because I've got Ashley Gunn. But all right, calm down. Let's not just start naming everyone. But I like to believe I've got more than one friend who's right wing. That's it. I've not got a token right wing friend. I have lots of right wing friends. But my point is that sometimes the people that we choose to hang out with, we have an implicit bias with, even in church life. So, Gene, you're right. For some weird reason, I'll go to church and no one talks to me as much because I'm a single person. I'm just a person by myself, right? And maybe you come to church and you are maybe a little bit older. Oh, Malcolm, why don't I look at you again then? But maybe you're a little bit older, and you feel that because church is so full of young people, no one comes and says hello, right? That's an implicit bias, isn't it? And church is awful at it. We're naff at it. And the only way to overcome that is to have someone who calls it out from time to time. Unfortunately, it's usually me or Laura who do that. You know, like we constantly go around church saying, "Oh, go and speak to that person, go and speak to that person," when we see someone who's not being spoken to. But if no one holds that as their responsibility, if that's not all of our responsibility, then suddenly these things and these people can get forgotten. Yeah? Which is bad news. How do we get over the issue of men and women?
But, you tend to encourage women to mix with women and men to mix.
Yep. So
how do you overcome that mix?
Yep. How do we overcome the whole men and women issue? Because it is an issue, because we do want to be seen as holy, and it's not right for me to be, going and have a Bible study around someone's house, for example, if they're female and they're all alone, right? That's not okay, is it? To some degree. To some degree, that person could say anything about me, right? I remember when I was a very young Christian. Again, I've probably been saved for about 2 or 3 weeks, and this young lady came in to church. She was not fully dressed. She was dressed, but not fully dressed. Probably really short, sort of cycling shorts and a t-shirt, and she was crying and stuff, and she was saying, "Oh, I really need to get to the other end of town. So I live at the other end of town. I've just been, just left someone's house and all this sort of stuff." And I was just like, "Oh yeah, cool. I'll get you a lift home. I've got a car." And my elder went to me, "No, Darren, that's not particularly wise. We'll get one of the ladies to give her a lift home." And bless him, he was totally right? Because you gotta look after yourself in some respects. But actually, at the same time, dude, what are you saying that young lady's going to do or say? Right? That's an implicit bias. You think that all women are dangerous to men's ministries. That's sexist. It's out of order. Yeah? And so there has to be a way of working around these things. One way that I like to do these things is I like to meet in public places. That's okay, isn't it? I like to have a diary that I'm held accountable for. So if I say to Angie, and we've had some one-to-one time doing some mentoring, haven't we? And so if I say to Angie, we're going to spend an hour doing this thing, then we'll spend an hour doing that thing. And I'm pretty good at time, so I'm like, we're not going to go over. Because sometimes it's important that you keep some good boundaries and stuff. But the point is that if we meet in a public place, this is a professional atmosphere. We're professionally having a professional relationship between a man and a woman that is for the kingdom's purpose, right? Yeah. Not less. We are quite different in age, so that sort of makes things a little bit easier, Not to say anything awful about you there, Angie. I wasn't trying to call out your age or nothing. I kid. Ageism. But there are ways and means. And I was just saying to you, Paul, earlier on about how we enter into different relationships and different covenants with people at different times. And to have a covenant with someone that isn't boundaried isn't okay. So if I am going to have a mentoring relationship with someone, I have 2 courses that I do in mentoring. Okay, one of those courses is called the 10 mentoring course, which I think you guys have done. Is that with Laura? Is that right? Malcolm's done that course. I'm not sure if you guys have been part of that course, but it's like 10 sessions looking at the very basic stuff for Christianity. Now, the covenant is that I'm going to spend some one-on-one time with you in a professional environment. We're going to go through this course together, and it's going to last 10 weeks, 9 weeks. At the end of that course, we're done, right? The next course that I offer, I call Choosing Growth. Now, in this course, things are a little bit more full on. So at the beginning of the course, the very first week of the course is us looking at what it means to have a mentoring covenant with one another, whereby I can challenge some of the stuff that you've got going on in your life and tell you either you need healing or you need to get over it, or you're just going to have to put this to one side. We've got to get past this to move forward. Because there's always stuff like that in people's lives, which is why the course is called Choosing Growth. It's choosing growth over smoking, if smoking is your thing. It's choosing growth over my mental health issue, if my mental health issue is holding me back. It's choosing growth over my gender, over my age, over whatever it is, you know. And so at some point during that course, I am guessing, and the point of that course is to guess that at some point during that course, I'm going to have to challenge you on a massive issue, which is a different level of covenant, isn't it? Yeah? And so what you do is you outline these things before you enter into them, so that you guys both know that this is the level of relationship that we're operating at, and we won't go beyond those boundaries. That way we can stay professional. You still get to, go for God. You still get to succeed at your thing, and we can go on a journey together, right? It's called being professional. And it's funny because I think there's a few times where you said to me, Darren, you're very process heavy. Yes, it's to keep everyone safe. It's to have good safeguarding. It's to have good boundaries. It's to make sure that I'm not overstepping my mark as a leader. Why? If you don't mind moving on. Because there is always power at play. There's always power at play. Whatever relationship we're in and whatever situation we find ourselves in, there is always power at play. And we all hold different power resources in our hands. For example, my name's Darren. By the way, I'm a male. That's a resource of power in our nation. Okay? I'm white. That's another resource of power. I'm a pastor. That's a huge resource of power. I have a degree, which means I'm sort of trained and clever, sort of. I try my hardest, which is another resource of power. I have money, another resource of power. I have backing. I have backing from my elders, from my leaders, from my region, from my national denomination. That's a big deal. That's more power. That's all these different resources of power. And so you might say that if I was to treat you in a certain way based on the way you look or smell or sound, then that would be an abuse of power. And we don't realize it, but there are always things going on with a power balance or imbalance. No matter who we are, where we are. I think I was just saying to Paul earlier on, Paul, if you don't mind me using you again, because we've been having a great conversation today. I was saying, like for Paul, you're an older man. You've been in church for a certain amount of time, longer than a lot of other people. And you seem like you know what you're on about. Okay? You seem like you've studied some stuff. And so to a young lady, for example, who comes into church, you don't realize it. But actually, you've got these 3 resources of power. And they have 0. Right? And so when you tell them what to do with their life, or when you treat them a certain way, you're engaging in using your power. Right? And so it's up to us to be aware of our power, or our privilege, if you don't mind me going there, and to not succumb to what they call power fragility. Have you guys heard of this? No, it's a bit like, so, and I must say, hey, I have been guilty of this. I have a privilege. I'm a person of power. I'm a person of authority and all that sort of stuff. When someone does something in our church that I might feel is detrimental to me and my ministry, I might then turn around and say, they've hurt me, and so I need justice. Yeah? But actually, I'm still the one in power. And so whatever that conversation looks like, I need to be aware that I hold the power in this situation. Even though I feel hurt, I need to be aware that I am the one who holds all of the cards. And that whole thing of, oh, I feel hurt, I need justice, is the fragility of it. Okay? And it's a way of people who are in power to garnish more power when they feel their power is being stripped from them. And it's a spiritual abuse in the church. Yeah? I wish I'd have given you the microphone. Say it again. Here you go. Let me just put your camera on. Here you go.
So it's really about manipulation, either consciously or subconsciously. Because you have that position of power, you can make that person who you feel has hurt you feel guilty, feel condemned, and really sort of drag them down in order to satisfy your need for justice and being felt that you've been hurt and that needs to be dealt with.
Yes, go
So years ago, my son's he's 37, he's going to be 38 this year, so he was 4.5, and me and my husband split up. There was lots of issues, there was adultery, he was in alcohol, a house was being repossessed, and he had turned quite perverse. But the thing is, the church that I was in at the time, I had to take him back. I had to take him back. There was no ifs and buts or anything. So I took him back, and I took him back a couple of times. But that, they used their position of authority where I shouldn't have taken him back.
Yeah, brilliant. Yes. And so because, and this is the worst thing, right? Because essentially they, unless they're invited by you to have that authority in your life, technically speaking, that is an overstepping of a boundary, right? So essentially, if we enter into conversation with someone to tell them how to lead their life and how to do life without first being invited to do so, then we've not technically entered into a covenant with them to do that thing, right? Which is essentially what back in the olden days they would call that heavy shepherding. Yeah? So that is to say things like, believe it or not, Ashley Gunn, back in the old days, pastors used to tell people how much they should tithe. I know. And then they used to double check that they were doing so. I've heard about churches doing that within the last 5 years. Right? Pastors would say who you can marry and who you can't marry. Right? Crazy, right? Absolutely mental. However, if, and again, it's so funny because we're talking about all the same stuff we talked about earlier on, because as you can see, I've been studying this stuff, right? But if someone was to say to me, Pastor, I really feel that this person is right for me, and I really feel that that we have a future together, what do you think, and could you pray for me? Then we're entering into a covenant, right? In which I can then say, yes, I will pray for you. That's my duty, that's my responsibility, and I will take my responsibility seriously, and so I will seek God on your behalf, right? And I will give you a genuine and honest answer because you've asked. Not because I want to tell you how to live your life. Yeah? Because I want to tell you how to live your life is an overstepping of the boundaries. Yeah? Oh, we're going deep, aren't we?
I can see there's blurred lines though, because as pastor,
Yep.
you have a responsibility towards your flock.
Yep. So as a pastor, I have a responsibility towards my flock. That's right. To shepherd them. Brilliant. So if I see someone who's entering into an abusive relationship, where do my boundaries lie with that? Well, there's no reason I couldn't ask them if they'd like some pastoral advice. If they say no, then that's none of my business, is it?
Are you not into safeguarding?
Is it a safeguarding issue? So if it's a safeguarding issue, then that's slightly different, isn't it? So if there's been... Well, this is it. So, what is abuse? Yeah. So is it someone who says negative things about women all the time and stuff like that? Then is that a safeguarding issue? Should I report it to the police? Because essentially if something's a safeguarding issue, then it should be reported to the safeguarding liaison. In Elim, that would be here in Lincoln. I think we have Laura and then a young lady called Leah, who some of you guys might have met. And then it also should also, if it's quite serious, should be reported to our head office, right? And then essentially that should be reported to the police and social services and all that sort of stuff. Now, if someone says, I heard on a grapevine that this guy it is ex-missus, then actually if it's just been reported on a grapevine, it's none of my business, legally speaking. And maybe spiritually speaking, it's none of my business. Because actually, it's not for me to listen to every bit of gossip that I hear out there, is it? That guy might be all right, and maybe someone's got an issue with him, for all I know. Or woman. Women hit men as well, don't they? Don't they? Yeah. Yeah. And so the question is about what relationship and what covenant in our relationship do we have? And it's not overstepping those boundaries, essentially, to not unconsciously use our power in an adverse way. Yeah? However, in terms of church, my power as pastor or my authority as pastor, the keys that I hold, I believe should be used for the progress of the church, not for Pastor Darren and his ministry. Which means that my job is actually to promote those who might be judged for looking different, who might be offered less opportunities because they smell different, or to befriend those who no one wants to be friends with, and to lift them up and see them succeed in their God-given purpose. And that looks very different, doesn't it, in lots of different contexts. What it means some days is that I deliberately push people who may be in a minority to the front here, which is sometimes quite hard because sometimes people don't want to be at the front. And I'm like, but God needs you to be at the front because he needs someone who looks and acts and smells like you to make way for others who look and act and smell like you to have more opportunity. And so we all fall on our swords, right, to some degree. It's my job, and hopefully you'll see this in our church quite regular, it's my job to lift up those who can't be lifted up or can't lift up themselves because they don't have the same power resources that I do. Because that's good justice, isn't it? It's also my job. I read today that to be anti-racist is to call out and acknowledge racist behaviour at any level. And so if I see something that is sexist or hear something that is sexist, if I want to be just and walk uprightly, my job is to call that out and highlight it and bring it into the light. If I see someone saying something that is racist, I'll do the same, or homophobic, I'll do the same. Sometimes it looks like me just saying, now's not the right time to have that discussion. Sometimes it looks like me saying, hey, that was out of order, you shouldn't have said that. Sometimes it looks like me taking the microphone back off someone and saying, if you're going to say stuff like that here, mate, you never get to touch that thing again. Depending on, where people are at. But we should be walking in justice, shouldn't we? We should be aware of our power and aware of our privilege. And we should be aware that sometimes we act like victims when actually we are the aggressors. Just because of the way we look, the way we sound, the way we smell. Yes.
Sorry, to be quite honest, most people that bully or use their power is normally people that have been put down themselves and they're fighting to get up. So people do it, and I'd say most of the time they don't even know what they're doing.
I think that's the definition of an implicit an implicit bias or an implicit power dynamic. It's unconscious a lot of the time. However, I might say that actually sometimes it's not that they've been hurt or bullied themselves. Sometimes it's actually part of the culture. So here's a biblical example. You ready? You're going to love this. This is so backwards, it's unbelievable. I'm literally going to turn the Bible upside down. You ready for this? Can I do this? You guys are all okay with this? Okay? We say that David did something really good when he was given an opportunity to kill Saul 2 or 3 times, right? Yeah? And he says this. He says the term, I will not harm a hair on the head of the Lord's anointed. Yeah? Okay? We see that as a good thing, right? But maybe in light of what we're learning here today, actually we can see that David is ushering in a particular culture that will mean that eventually when he gets into power, no one will go after him. Right? Because if David says this, then everyone must say it afterwards, because this is good. No one will touch, no one will harm a hair on the head of the Lord's anointed. Can I just, I feel, when you're sure that Holy Spirit's in the room, you know that feeling? I feel like I'm ready to cry a little bit. How many times have you heard that said of a pastor who you have a complaint about? You shall not harm a hair on the head of the Lord's anointed. But hang on, that guy has all of the power cards. And whether he's aware of it or whether he isn't, he's just done something that I consider to be spiritually abusive towards me. And then the elders say, you shall not harm the hair on the head of the Lord's anointed. And they quote David, who one might say ushered in an opportunity for every Christian leader everywhere to spiritually abuse people.
Hi. I'm just thinking about the Lord's anointed. I'm thinking of Eli and his sons. Surely it is better to actually speak to someone about a problem rather than let God deal with it. because in that case he did, the whole family.
Yeah. That's it, yeah. And that's right, isn't it? And so we should, I'll be honest with you, this lecture is going somewhere where I never thought it would go. We were talking about implicit bias, we're now talking about church leadership structures. We should all be held accountable as leaders. So in an Elim church, the way things are supposed to run is there are members who vote in and elders who then are the sort of accountability for pastors. And so those members then get to hold leaders accountable. Okay? I mentioned this on Sunday as well. And so in that space, what happens is I, Darren, am held accountable to the people that I'm leading. And if they feel that I have used my power incorrectly or without boundaries or without due care and attention, they can bring a complaint against me. As I said on Sunday, the trouble is when there is loads of accountability from the top down and no accountability from the bottom up. Because that's when spiritual abuse happens and you end up running into a culture that is abusive, not just a leader. Okay? It is 7:00. And so we will take just a couple of questions to finish, and then we're all going to go. Is that all right? Has anyone got any questions or any final remarks about implicit bias, preferably? No, we're good? Have we enjoyed this evening? Has it been all right? Yeah? Made you think. Would anyone like to come and pray for us? Shall I pray then? Okay. Let me pray. Lord, Justice is such a huge issue. And the way that we treat each other is really important to you. We know that. We also know that differences should be celebrated and not swept under the carpet. Lord, forgive us for when we have been unaware of the power cards that we hold and the way in which we use them to forget people or to treat people differently. Forgive me as a leader for when I've not given opportunities to people that you had anointed. Help me to do better in the future. In Jesus' name, amen. Wasn't that awesome? I enjoyed that conversation and the discussion that happened around the subject of implicit bias. In this moment, I'm wondering whether you would be open to the idea of praying that prayer that David once prayed. Lord, would you search my heart? Would you search the deepest places within me and seek out anything that is within me that isn't of you? Help me to be holy, and holy in the way that I use my power and the privilege that I've been given. In the meantime, why don't you hit up that subscribe button, or maybe even that little bell button? The little bell button means that you get a notification sent to your emails whenever we go live or whenever we upload something. I hope that you have a great rest of the week.